I managed to get away to the ocean for a week in late June. One beautiful day, the surf looked mild, and I waded into the water for a quick swim. The next thing I knew, a wave knocked me down. For a moment, I was unable to get up, the water churning above me. I've spent much of my life in the ocean, from a childhood floating in the gentle waters off Miami beaches to wetsuit-clad boogie boarding in the formidable breakers off San Francisco's Ocean Beach, to playing with my kids in the sunny surf of Santa Monica, to swimming with dolphins in the Hawaiian seas. This spring, I took a weekly dive into the cold April waters off Brooklyn as a life-affirming escape from total lockdown. In other words, I'm a confident ocean swimmer. But this wave took me by surprise. I just didn't see it. It didn't look like much to me. Feeling myself pushed against the sand, I knew to remain calm, to trust that if I waited, there'd be a moment when I could get to my feet and come up for air. But as soon as I'd laughed it off, the very next wave knocked me flat on my back again. This time I took a gulp of water and fear rushed through me. When I could get up again, I took these waves more seriously. Perhaps you remember the story of Grace Fusco, who died at age 73 of the novel coronavirus, just hours after her son died, 5 days after her daughter died, and the day before her other son died. The tragic news of the Fusco family's deaths hit on March 18th, representing the scale and toll of COVID-19 with shocking force, just as the first wave of the pandemic was crashing over our heads. It's hard to remember how little we saw it coming, how much was unknown, how quickly the information was changing. That day, March 18th, Governor Cuomo signed an executive order limiting non-essential businesses to no more than 50% of their workforce on site. The very next day, he changed it to 25%, and the very next day, all non-essential businesses were ordered closed. That feeling of being suddenly, shockingly underwater, tossed so we can't tell what's up and what's down. In Hebrew, the word for crisis is the same as the word for a powerful wave, mashber. In English, breakers are big ocean waves, and like in English, the word mashber comes from the root that means to break, brokenness, destruction, shattering, ruin. The pandemic curve looks like a wave, and we call it one. Tomorrow afternoon, we'll hear the prophet Jonah crying to God from the belly of the fish, "You cast me into the depths, into the heart of the sea. All your breakers, your waves swept over me. The deep engulfed me." There's a Hasidic story called the Ocean of Tears. I'm going to be telling it during Yizkor tomorrow. But this year, we have an ocean of unwept tears. What happens when more than 200,000 people die in a country that refuses to take the crisis seriously, that refuses to officially honor the dead, to say their names, to see their faces, to tell their stories? What happens when there is no public mourning, no shared narrative, no acknowledgement of what this crisis is doing to us? Black and brown people and elders disproportionately hospitalized and dying, people hungry on food lines. Weddings canceled, b'nai mitzvah and graduations done without family, children kept from their friends, vacations and milestones missed, so much joy on hold. In Judaism, fasts are expressions of collective mourning. We fast in grief at the calamity that has overtaken us, weeping, tearing our garments, allowing tears to roll down our faces, sobs to come from our chests. We need to mourn. Collective mourning is the first step of teshuvah, of turning. Only when we let out our tears can we see what needs to change and how. Only after that release can we find the power, the energy to do what must be done. We need to cry. And it matters that we do it together, because suffering makes us feel apart. When the person you've shared your bed with for 50 years or 30 years or 20 years is suddenly gone. When you find out that you have a disease that might kill you. When you learn that your child is not okay. When you see that your marriage is over. When you cannot do your life's work. When your parent enters the long fog of dementia and can't recognize your face. When you realize you're caught up in abuse or addiction. When what seemed whole is suddenly broken. It isn't just the crash of the wave. It isn't just being knocked flat. It isn't just gasping for air. You are drawn out to sea, an impossible distance from the people on the shore. And it feels like no one can reach you where you are. You feel adrift, knocked about, utterly alone. Right away, it became evident that one of the most devastating things about this pandemic was that we would be unable to hold each other as the breaker crashed into our bodies. Because of the nature of the virus, families could not touch their sick and dying loved ones, no matter what they were dying of. Some of you could not hold the hands of your father or your mother or your husband or your brother while they were dying. Could not even enter the hospital or the nursing facility or the bedroom. Some could not even speak by phone. Some never even got a chance to say goodbye. Some could not go to the cemetery, could not bury your dead. Even when you were able to stand at graveside, you could not embrace each other. You could not hold hands. You could not wipe away tears. You could not collapse in each other's arms. This is the unique cruelty of the COVID pandemic. Not even AIDS had been cruel in quite this way. The breaking of human connection is its own crisis. It is a crisis for those facing illness, death, and mourning. And it is a crisis for every human broken away from family and friends. Loneliness was already an epidemic in America. 1 in 3 people were affected by loneliness before the pandemic, 1 in 12 seriously. As we've all learned these past 6 months, seeing people through a screen is just not the same as seeing them in person. However, seeing people through a screen is much better than not seeing them at all. It's a complicated question whether the internet and social media makes this better or worse. Each medium, from Facebook to TikTok to texting to FaceTime to Twitter, has the potential to either cheapen human interaction or restore us to each other in the most profound ways. It all depends on how we use it. Like any technology, the printing press, the telegraph, telephone, podcast. In all of it, we're trying to translate what's happening in here, inside me, with what's happening in there, inside you. We're trying to move from me to we. The issue is that we have to remember and actually visualize that there is a full 3-dimensional human on the other side. We reach for each other across space and time, trying to say, I see you. Can you hear me? We're all only waves. Brain waves, heart waves we call pulse, waves of breath, electrical waves along neural pathways that lead to kinetic waves. In fact, we know that every cell, every atom, every particle is also just waves. What is song? What is language? But translations of brain waves, heart waves, thoughts, and feelings into sound waves. Radio, television, video, all waves, trying to connect one inner world to another inner world. Writing is translation of feeling and thought into symbols that are transmitted through light waves into thought and feeling in another human. What a leap of faith that I could know you, that I could see you, that we could understand each other, that we could traverse the social distance, the ocean between us. If we can do that through literature, surely we can do it through YouTube or Instagram or Zoom and whatever comes next. We just have to use these media to go deep instead of shallow. When I read a novel, when I write a sermon, when I look into this camera, I have to believe that there are real, fleshy, warm, breathing, crinkly-eyed humans on the other side, that we can understand each other, that what's in here can translate to what's in there. The question of loneliness is whether my inner world is too remote, too different, too distant from your inner world, or whether together there can be a syncing up, not just one-to-one, but a collective understanding and belonging. Isn't that what singing together is? That feeling? We can't sing together on Zoom, or at least without breaking our ears a little bit. But I want to try something with you tonight. Our friends at Union Temple taught me this. When I inhale, I'll open my hand. And when I exhale, I'll close my hand. See if you can sync up with me and with each other, if we can become attuned in our breathing across all the distance between us. If you're on Zoom, you can see the people around you and try a big collective wave resonance, as if you're singing together. And if you're not able to see the Zoom, like me, you just have to trust that you're connected to hundreds of other people out there, and that it matters. It matters for you to breathe with us. I'm going to take this leap of faith with you, okay? Sometimes the wave of feeling that move through our bodies are pleasant, like love or gratitude or connectedness. And sometimes they're unpleasant, like grief or fear or loneliness. Sometimes they're so powerful we feel like we can't stand it. Sometimes we do things to numb ourselves to our waves of feeling. For me, sometimes twilight is a time of melancholy, and I can feel a wave of loneliness coming on. I think that at its essence, it's a fear that I will live and die alone. I think to some degree, at least a little bit, this is a fear we all share. There are ways through touch or words or art or listening or love that we can feel utterly seen and understood and known. But underneath it all, that existential loneliness is still there. There are always some aspects of in here that cannot be translated to in there. Some things that will never be understood. Sometimes, in those lonely moments of twilight, I distract myself. But sometimes I just sit in the darkening room and I let the wave break over me. And I let it turn into tears if it will. When I have the courage to do that, it's always better. We're alone, and we're not alone. In Tuesdays with Maury Schwartz tells a story. This is a story about a little wave bobbing along in the ocean, having a grand old time. He's enjoying the wind and the fresh air until he notices other waves in front of him crashing against the shore. My God, this is terrible, the wave says. Look what's going to happen to me. And then along comes another wave. It sees the first wave looking grim, and it says, why do you look so sad? And the first wave says, you don't understand. We're all going to crash. All of us waves are going to be nothing. Isn't it terrible? And the second wave says, no, you don't understand. You're not a wave. You're part of the ocean. Part of the ocean, the first wave says. Oh, part of the ocean. Of course, the main message of this story is that our separateness is an illusion, that we're part of a great ocean of being. But there's another part of the story that I don't want you to miss. At first, it seemed like the little wave was all alone, but then he had a friend who accompanied him and comforted him when he was most afraid and most sad. We hear this, we know this, and yet, when another morning comes and we wake to realize that our loved one is still dead, or when we get a call that someone we love has fallen ill, it still feels like we're so alone and so small in that vast ocean. There's a story in the Talmud of a terrible shipwreck. When the rabbis learn that none other than Rabbi Akiva was on board, they tear their garments and they mourn and they weep for the bright light in Israel that has perished. But Rabbi Akiva did not die in that shipwreck. He survived. And later, he said that he survived by holding on to a plank of the ship, a piece of the broken vessel. And wave after wave, he nodded his head. Those who know how to surf can tell us that the key to survival is acknowledging when a wave is just too big, accepting when a wave is too strong, and bowing beneath it to reduce its impact. We don't know if a next wave is coming to New York, or how big it will be, or how deadly. This time we will bow as soon as we see it coming. We will do what we must do to keep each other safe, to protect essential workers, and we will commit to eliminating the inequality laid bare in its wreckage. On my day at the beach in June, when the second wave knocked me down, I wasn't alone. I was there at the sea with a good friend. In fact, 2 years earlier, this same friend and I had been swimming at the same shore when a wave hit her from behind and she went under, swallowing water. We were out a little deep, and suddenly the waves felt menacing. I could see the fear in her eyes, and I reached out and I held her hand and I guided her back to land. This time, the situation was reversed, and she reached out to me. Perhaps because I was embarrassed to have been knocked off my feet. Perhaps because of the habit of social distancing. I would not take her hand in that moment, insisting instead that I could do it on my own. I've got it, I said. I've got it, I'm fine. I could do it on my own. I was fine. We're all kind of fine. But we don't have to do it on our own. And what is lost when that outstretched hand is left unheld? The Hebrew word mashber, crisis and wave, breaker, break, destruction, ruin, has another set of meanings. Birthing stool, or the opening of the womb. After all, every one of our births was preceded by the breaking of waters. And the Israelite nation was born through the waves of a sea broken open. We ask ourselves, through all of this crisis, wave by wave, what is being born? Many social scientists have demonstrated that crises, storms, earthquakes, bombings, blackouts, epidemics, show humanity who we really are. We usually tell ourselves that people are selfish, that no one will look out for each other, that I have to hoard what's mine because no one will take care of me or help me survive. We can see those impulses at play in COVID-19, but much more, we see crises like this one bring out empathy and courage and altruism among human beings. A great collective spirit rises up among us from the 7 p.m. cheer to the mutual aid societies. And feeling that camaraderie, recognizing our mutual dependence, we become starkly aware of injustice, the unfair exposure to risk for some of us. We feel our sisterhood and our brotherhood. We feel our shared destiny. Our sense of separateness wears thin, becomes transparent, revealing that we are all in this sea together. Rebecca Solnit writes that this feeling of belonging to each other, of responsibility for each other, creates a startling, sharp joy. It creates a window into social possibility. Disasters like COVID-19 are tragic, period. And we see within them that the citizens that any thriving society requires, the people who are brave enough and resourceful enough and generous enough, are already right here. I was speaking to a member of our congregation who's battling cancer, who did round after round of chemo and made it through surgery, and then they found more cancer. And so she began another wave of treatment. And she said to me recently, not knowing what I was planning for this sermon, okay, so I got knocked down. I got water in my nose, but I'm getting up again. I am getting up again. Sometimes we get knocked down. Sometimes we get pulled out to sea. Sometimes we weep a sea of tears. Sometimes we cannot even cry. Holy One, help us to bow when the wave is too big. Give us the courage to reach for the outstretched hands and the strength to get up again. And remind us that we're all waves, thinking and feeling and hurting and loving and lonely and belonging and grateful and grieving, all just waves, all part of the ocean.